Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Modern Golden Age podcast. And today I have with me Maria. And Maria, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to talk with you. And I was just wondering if you could tell us how to pronounce your surname. Because usually when I do these conversations, people have trouble saying João. But your surname, that I think is Polish, is actually really hard for me to say. So I was wondering if you could teach me that first.
Yeah, sure. My name is Maria Górska-Piszek, and thanks for having me here, João.
Oh, it's fun. So I'm not even going to try to say that because I'll probably butcher it. So you were one of, when I was starting the second season of the podcast, I stumbled upon your article on your 12 favorite questions, and one of them is what's your role in this new golden age? And we'll get to that. But you have a bunch of other different questions that I really enjoy, and I want to explore it. But first, I was wondering, how did you come up with this idea of finding your 12 favorite questions? And what was the process like?
I think I first saw this idea on Patrick Collison's blog, or it was another one of Tech Giants. And the whole premise behind it was what you focus on is what you're actually going to work on, is what you're actually going to explore. And I really like the idea of exploring questions rather than topics or theses or answers. Because if you start with a question, you're never sure where it's going to take you. You don't get attached to a single idea or to a single point of view or to a single identity. So it took me a long time to put this list together. I think I started on Twitter by just posting one or two that were alive for me at the moment. And then I slowly started building this list by looking at common recurring themes in my life and the common topics that I keep writing about and keep tweeting about. And altogether it came down to 12 questions. And I put this list together almost a year ago, and now looking at it, I would probably add something more about religion and spirituality. But yeah, that's beautiful about it. These are all open-ended questions, and they are all very broad, and they can take me and everyone else in so many different directions. Because if I put a question how do we bring about, I don't know, communist revolution, then you're narrowing yourself down to a certain solution. And perhaps this isn't the best solution to all of the world's problems. And I like the term modern golden age because it's broad. It can lead you in so many different directions, and how everybody understands modern golden age can be very different, and it also it opens a whole area of exploration and so many different possibilities.
Yeah, and we'll definitely explore that. You mentioned that right now you would probably had a bunch of questions on religion and spirituality. Why that is? Have you been thinking about it? What kind of questions have been popping in your mind around that topic?
Yeah, so I just read a book called Strange Rites, and I think it was recommended to me by Tiago Forte on one of his Interintellect salons. And I really enjoyed reading this book until the last chapter. And I was so dissatisfied with it in the end. So the main thesis of this book is that millennials and modern people in general are trying to put together, satisfy their religious needs by putting together lots of different practices and lots of different rituals. But ultimately, this modern millennial religion, the author of this book called it the remixed spirituality, because you're taking a bit of yoga and a bit of tarot and a bit of this and a bit of that, and you're building your own spiritual practice that's a pure reflection of who you are and your personal identity and your personal values. And the main thesis of this book was we are like very individualistic in our spiritual practice, and ultimately like all of these practices are like worship of the self. Like you are your own final god, you are your own final spiritual authority, and this whole wellness culture is like cutting out toxic people out of your life, which means like anyone who demands something from you. And like I was reading this book and I was like, oh my God, this book is about me and I don't like it. And then in the end, the author was like, okay, yeah, we have this and we have like alt-right, which is like a reactionary response to this like very individualistic movement. But it's actually like very individualistic as well. Like it worships like nature and strength and power, but ultimately like there's no transcendent meaning behind it either. And then there's also like social justice, which is also the same thing from another angle. And that's how the book ended. Like there was no conclusion, no hint that a different world could be possible and a different approach to spirituality could be possible. Because, we have all these traditional religions that suppress the individual in favor of like the community and in favor of the tradition and authority and all these things. And this whole like reactionary, this whole remixed spirituality was a response to that, because like people don't want to be suffocated, and the things that are happening in Iran, for example, right now, are a good example like, of what happens if you take this authority side too far. But on the other hand, like, if you go too far in the individualistic direction, you end up with like a 20-step daily self-care routine that ultimately, just doesn't lead you anywhere because you're so focused on yourself.
Yeah.
And
that makes a lot of sense, and it's actually a problem that I've discussed previously with a bunch of my friends, because I think one of the things that happens a lot, especially in Europe, since we have like this whole Christian tradition, is you're raised a Catholic, and then you start to understand that a bunch of things that don't make sense, and then you start having like this inner quest around spirituality, and you either start to completely denying it, which to me is not a great solution, or you just do that where you create your own kind of relationship or your own kind of religion, right? Like an almost a DIY around spirituality, and the problem is that it's that it may be self-serving, meaning like sometimes religion is supposed to help you transcend, and if you want to transcend something, you need to be challenged, because you cannot be at your current state and still transcend, right? And if I'm just cherry-picking the ideas that I want from all these different religions, what will end up happening is I'm always like comfortable, I guess, and I'm not sure if that's good, actually, because the religion plays a part on our own meaning, I'm guessing. In fact, I found it curious because there was one article where even what we can say and what we cannot say, like the whole relationship around taboos, which are not something very good, but like you have this one article where you say that dietary taboos are nothing new, but given that religions don't carry as much power as they used to, food is now one of the very few taboos that most people share. And I thought that was a very meaningful look at the different roles of religion, and I thought that was really, really fun that you brought that up. So, speaking of the questions that are already there, one of my favorites is actually the second one, where you ask, why has Western civilization given up on beauty? And I know that having those 12 problems or having those 12 questions, because they're so broad, usually you don't get to a final answer. But like, I was wondering, what kind of conclusions have you arrived since asking this question? Like, why have we as Western civilization abandoned beauty?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a very fascinating Twitter thread about it recently from a guy who's calling himself, I think, Empty America. And his thesis was that beauty comes naturally from like low-tech hard labor. Like if you see oxes plowing the fields and a wooden hut somewhere in the background, like it's naturally beautiful. Like you don't really have to put any effort into making this beautiful other than the effort of hard work that you're doing anyway. But as soon as people have a chance, like, they would rather abandon this hard work and, you know, relax a little bit. So, like, most of the not so beautiful things around us are born out of convenience. Like, we have all this plastic food packaging because it's so much easier to distribute this food all around the world. And, you know, I complain that, like, my yogurt comes in an ugly plastic box, but I still buy this instead of making my own yogurt at home because it's so much more convenient this way. So, yeah, I was wondering about it, like, how much convenience can I sacrifice for the sake of beauty and for the sake of environment and for the sake of, you know, ritual, like how much more meaningful it is to make my own yogurt from scratch and then give it to my family versus like buying something ready, and how much delicious it would be. But in the end, like, I'm still buying the plastic yogurt for some reason.
I think that, like, the relationship between beauty and convenience is something that definitely is worth exploring. There's this modern sculpture is called Fan something. I cannot remember his name, but I'll have it on the podcast notes. And he's a modern sculptor. He says that, like, I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is beauty takes work, right? If you want to build something beautiful, especially in art, you need to spend time to actually crafting or painting, or if you're writing a musical piece, you need to spend time making sure that every single note is aligned with what's most beautiful. And in our current society, I feel like we're not optimizing for artwork and for that level of patience and commitment with the project, but we're optimizing, as you were saying, with convenience. Like, and my segue question would be, well, what do you think we are losing as individuals with that? Like, what is the impact that the lack of beauty has had in us?
So I feel like the main thing that we're losing is like direct relationship with material world, because if you're surrounded by like disposable products, like if everything around you is disposable, like, it might as well end up in trash, and you can bring another similar object from the shop and nothing changes. So, like, sometimes I ask people, like, what's the most beautiful thing that you own? And it's always something that's either handmade or it was gifted to them by someone in a very special occasion and has a whole story behind it. Or it is something that's made by, you know, very skilled workers with very fine precision, something that can't be crafted in a factory. So altogether, like, it doesn't really have to be, you know, like, very professional very professional work. It just has to have some heart put into it. So, I made a sweater for my daughter. It took me like many weeks to make it because, like, I'm not very good at handcrafts. And in the end, like, she doesn't want to wear it because, I don't know, it's not comfortable enough for her. Maybe I got the proportions wrong. I don't know. And I'm like, well, she's going to be too big to wear it in a few months. And it's breaking my heart. And if it was, like, you know, something bought in the store, I wouldn't care about it. But because, like, I've put so much work into it and so much love into it, like, this sweater can't be replaced with something else that I just, like, bought in a few minutes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I do want to talk about your daughter and about family, which I know is a very important topic to you. But I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about one other question, which you posed. And I was going through your questions, and I did the same exercise a few months ago, and I feel like you have done it in a very much. Like, yours is way better, because I had all these self-questions. I thought, these are the questions, I found it. And then I forgot about, like, I mean, like 10 of them, only 2 actually resonate. So I was like, maybe I didn't get it. But like one of them that you posed, and I was like, oh, this is such a great question, is what does it mean to be educated? And you actually have questions that then go with this bigger one, like what skills, understanding, tools, cultural references, experiences, and achievements do people need at the start of their adult lives? What's the best way to acquire all these things, and in what environment does it happen? And so I was wondering, like, first of all, do you still resonate with this question? And then I think that's a great bridge to what you do actually with Interintellect. So I was wondering if you could talk us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so my relationship with education is a bit complicated. So when I was a kid, like my parents put a lot of time and effort into giving me the best education that they could. And, you know, like they were the first ones out of their respective families to go into college, and this took them out of extreme poverty. So this was like really, really important for both of them, for me to be educated. And it ended up with me like being this kind of like prodigy kid and getting all the best grades and winning all the best competitions, and then going to college and realizing like I don't know how to learn at all because it was always my parents teaching me, and I was, you know, like completely incapable of like enjoying learning because like it was never my choice, or of, you know, like learning actually on my own. Like I didn't really open any book at all until I was like 23 or 24 since going to college, because like I was so burned out of learning and so burned out of knowledge. And then like thinking about it, I was like, okay, I'm not going to make the same mistakes with my kid. Like I will just give her a stick and put her in a puddle, and she will just like explore whatever she wants to explore, and I will not force her to learn anything, and she can be like this free range kid and just like run around and do whatever she wants to. Like, I was thinking about homeschooling or unschooling. I have a bunch of friends who are doing this, but I was really distrustful of this education system where you need to learn like certain things at a certain time at the same pace as everyone else in the class. And it really matters so much, like who's the best one in the class. And it matters, like, and if you're not the best one in the class, you're a failure. So like I was really distrustful of this thing and of this whole educational process that I went through. And now suddenly, like my daughter isn't even 2 years old now, and she can't really speak yet, but she already wants to learn the letters. Nobody suggested this to her. Like she's sitting at her breakfast looking at the tomato box, and she's like, Mama, read the letters to me. And you know, like, it made me realize, like, well, maybe my parents weren't really forcing me to learn all these things when I was a kid. Like, if she's like that and nobody tried to teach her letters before, like, she really wants to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, this is a hard balance between like guiding the kid and showing them like what kind of possibilities there are, because like if you have a kid who's like living in a village and never heard about an astronaut, like how will they know that this is an option they might want to pursue? But on the other hand, like if you impose your own preferences and your own ideas about who a kid should become, like then they might forget like what's the joy in learning and what they actually want to learn.
Yeah.
So this is a hard balance. And like circling back to your question, like what kind of experiences an education person needs to have, like, I feel like a lot of it comes from agency, and I think agency was somewhere on my list as well, which means like the kid can make their own decisions, feel the consequences of these decisions, and take responsibility for it. And you start with something small, like cooking an egg, and then you build up your skills and build up your confidence that you can actually make things happen. And if something doesn't go well, that you have the tools to deal with it, and to learn from it, and to do better next time, and or to ask for help if needed. Like, this is a big one as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like education to me is like the fundamental step for us to get into a modern golden age. And it's also the area where I work and I'm passionate about. And I think that like what you were mentioning, I was thinking about that is So the way your parents, like what you're saying, like in the end, it was your daughter that wanted to learn the letters. It wasn't you that just said, look, we're going to learn the letters right now. But unfortunately, when you get into the educational system, you lose that agency of choice. Like what you're mentioning, connecting both ideas was, well, she wanted to learn that. Maybe if she actually pointed out to numbers, you would teach her numbers, right? So she has the agency to pursue the things that she's interested in. But in the educational system, that doesn't happen that way, right? You're forced the specific path that you need to follow, and that's definitely not something good. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about your question also is that it opens the possibility that educated has nothing to do with titles or with specific degrees or with specific colleges, but with skills and references and tools. And so that's a great question and definitely a great answer. So I wanted to jump into the family part, because like there's a lot of people that follow people on Twitter and they're very happy because they're like on the verge of what's happening like technologically, and they're posting all these different insights about that, and that's great and I love them. But like the one reason, or one of the biggest reasons I use Twitter and love Twitter, is because I follow people that are either in a long-term relationship for a long time and are making it work, or they're parents and they are just talking about being a parent. Because one day, first of all, I have a relationship and I want it to be a long-term one, and also one day I want to be a parent. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about those. So I would start with the relationship. I always ask this for couples that are together for a while, like, what are some of the principles that you practice that allow you to sustain like this relationship for longer periods of time?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer questions like this. Like, first of all, like, I was very lucky to find my husband. Yeah, seriously, I don't know how we found each other, but I can't imagine having this successful relationship with anyone else. So, okay. and if somebody asks me, like, how did I find him? Like, I have no idea.
It's just luck.
It was just like, no, like, so I already mentioned this on Eyal's podcast, that like I came back from a very long business trip, and all of my friends were like, oh, Arthur is looking for a wife. And this was very surprising because like I was like 27 at that time, and nobody out of my friends was looking for a wife. Like everybody was like hooking up, going on dates, looking for boyfriends, girlfriends, partying. And I'm like, well, this guy is looking for a wife? Like, who is that actually? You know, like we knew each other from work, but we weren't like very close before. And then I started reading his blog, and I saw a bucket list on his blog, and there was a list like of all the things like he already did, like all the places he wanted to go, all the experiences he wanted to have, like all the things he wanted to build. And there was like having a great relationship with my wife and 3 kids. I'm like, yeah, maybe I should write my own bucket list as well. Like, this is such a great idea. And then I started writing a bucket list, and I realized, okay, I'm not going to come up with anything better than he did. Maybe I should just like take his bucket list as my own and do all these things together. And that's how we started dating.
That's awesome. That's a great story. Speaking of kids, like one of the things that I'm really passionate about is just, first of all, everything related to kids and having children and all that, but also like I'm really appreciative of the fact that you're posting or you're updating on Twitter some of the things that are happening while having a child, like what are the good things and the problems or the challenges that you're facing. And so I would start first with the deeper question, and then we can get into specifics. Like the main question that I had here was like, what are some of the things that you feel that changed when you were a mother?
Oh, this is a huge one. So I don't want this to sound too pessimistic or something, but the ability to rest and recover is like much more constrained it's not like you can't ever rest, but you need to like make deliberate choices and carve out some time for yourself. So like this weekend, like it was the first time since Eva was born when I spent a night without her. And she's almost 2. And like until now, like I was putting her to bed and waking up with her almost every night. Yeah. So yeah, like the things that you take for granted, like the ability to like come back from work and just like unwind in front of Netflix or Twitter or whatever is your drug of choice. Mine is not Twitter. So yeah, like at this point there comes the baby, and she doesn't take breaks. She won't take no for an answer. She can't sometimes wait even for 5 minutes. So yeah, this is the challenging part. The beautiful part is you start rediscovering all of life from scratch again. And, you know, like all these things you took for granted suddenly become magical and so full of meaning again. Like, I don't know, last week we were reading a book and there was a poem about like a mom and daughter going on a walk together, and there was a moon following them back home. And we were reading this poem, and suddenly Eva noticed there's moon outside of a window, and she was like, there's a moon in the book and a moon on the side. And she climbed as far as she could and raised the book, and moon, look, you are in our book. And it was like so cute and so beautiful. Yeah. And you know, like she's feeding her stuffed animals, she's taking care of our dog and everyone else around, and like she's so full of love for life and all the little things that I sometimes overlook. And yeah, this is like really beautiful, and it's a treasure to watch her interact with the world, watch her build relationships with both like people and animals, but also like objects that I would never imagine having a relationship with, like this book or this moon. Or
that's beautiful. So I was wondering, like, in as you mentioned, like Eva is fairly young, but like if you, let's say that I'm having a child in like a month, besides taking time of course that the relationship when having a child, like the relationship of a father and a mother is totally different, but like for anyone that's listening and is a mother and is about to have a child in say like a month, like what are some of the things that you already learned that you can share that will make it easier for them?
Don't take parenting advice too seriously, including this. Yeah, so like whenever I was born, like I got really into like some of the parenting books, and they were great, and most of it was really good advice about like how to have conversations about emotions and like how to navigate anger and frustration and sadness in the child. But at the same time, like if you take anything too religiously, it becomes a problem on its own. So, like, for example, like I remember reading in one of the books, like, never offer food for emotional comfort, because then it leads to, like, disordered eating habits. And I get that. Like, I have this problem as well sometimes, that, like, I eat not because I'm hungry, but because I'm sad or upset. So, like, I took that very seriously, and I tried to figure out, like, is my daughter upset or is she really hungry when she was like 2 months old, which makes no sense at all. But because I read this book and it was like so strict about like your child isn't their own person, like from the moment they are born you need to treat them seriously from the moment they are born. And this is great, but when it comes to figuring out if a child is hungry or not, like maybe... And some of the books were like very strict about like not having pacifiers, and some of them were like very strict about like not having plastic toys or not watching YouTube. And I'm doing all of this, and you know, like I feel like yes, watching YouTube is not perfect, but if I have a very important meeting right now, like this is the only way for me to have this important meeting, and that's a trade-off I'm willing to make. And I feel like my daughter will be better off in the end for it. Of course, if I put her in front of YouTube like for 5 hours a day, that would be another thing.
Yeah.
But if it's every once in a while, yeah, like I'm okay with her watching dumb stuff sometimes. Mm-hmm. That's part of life too.
Of course, that makes a lot of sense. I'm really sure that a lot of mothers that will listen to this will be like, oh, okay, maybe I should not take parenting advice that seriously, because I do believe that that's one of the things. Like, once again, I'm not a parent yet, but like one of the things that I believe is that once you are, like, everyone starts having like a specific opinion on how you should do it. Like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. Like family and friends and everyone is saying all these different things, and maybe it's really important to understand like the relationship with your child and just let it grow from there. So I like. Speaking to your family, like one of the things that I know you guys do is to basically you have an RV and you travel like all around. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Like, how did that started? What are some of your favorite places? How's that, like, doing that with the 2-year-old? Just give us a brief understanding of what does that look like.
Yeah, this is my favorite part. So, like, even before the pandemic, like, both my husband and I were working remotely, so we traveled quite a lot. Like, every 3 or 4 months every year, we were somewhere traveling, and a lot of it was organized around, like, business meetups. So, like, we had a company meetup, say, in Canada, so, like, for 1 month after, we stayed traveling in an RV and going to different places in Canada. And then we went to Mexico or Thailand or other places. And then the pandemic happened and we were grounded at home. So at first we were like, okay, maybe it's a good time to have a dog. So we adopted a dog. And as soon as the dog appeared in our life, like a few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. So... And we were like, okay, yeah, this is a good time to have both a dog and a kid because, like, we're not going anywhere. But after a while, like, sitting at home and doing nothing started to wearing on us. And we realized, okay, like, maybe the hotels are closed, but if you come in your own RV and, like, park it somewhere, like, nobody's going to force you out of it. Like, you're still social distancing. So, yeah, like, we were thinking, like, we were traveling in RV before, like, in Canada, twice, I think. But this was the time when we were like, okay, if we want to keep traveling at all, like, this is the way to go. And so, like, the first year we were only like trying this in Poland, and then when Eva was born, like, the first time we went on a longer trip was when she was 5 months, I think. And you know, like, a 5-month-old is very dependent. Like, she couldn't even sit yet. She couldn't even crawl yet. Like, whenever you put her, she will just, like, lay down there. And at the same time, like, she's not getting into trouble yet because, like, she's too small to get into trouble. So this was, like, pretty convenient. And yeah, so since we started, we went on 4 trips like this all together. And our favorite place is, like, northern Italy. Like, somehow, no matter where we plan to go, we almost always end up in northern Italy. Yeah, we started wondering, like, if we should buy a house there maybe because there's something... You know, you have mountains and a lake and very close to the sea and delicious food and cheerful people, like, and the lifestyle is, like, so relaxed. Like, I don't know how we always end up there. But... Yeah. So the best thing about living in an RV is, like, you open the door and you are in the most beautiful place ever. Because you can park it anywhere and you can just, like, make your temporary home in a national park. And if you wanted to, like, live in a hotel in a national park, like, there would still be, like, these common spaces and parkings and then the road to the actual beautiful place. And the campsites are usually, like, right in the middle of the most iconic views of all. So So, like when I live in a city apartment, like I need to cross 7 different doors in order to be outside, and two elevators when I'm with a stroller. So the difference is striking. And even if I go outside, like that's a very, crowded neighborhood with lots of huge blocks. Like I don't get mountains or beautiful views here in Warsaw. And yeah, being able to be in nature anytime I want is just striking, and it's like so relaxing and refreshing. And even if I'm working on the road, just like going outside or just like sitting outside and working in a beautiful place does wonderful things to my mind and soul.
Yeah. So what are some of the, like you mentioned like your favorite place being northern Italy, but like what are some of the favorite views you have had, like the moment where you opened the window and saw those amazing views? Like what are some of your favorite?
Yeah, so Lake Garda, it's in northern Italy, very close to Verona. And it's like a very big lake. On a cloudy day, you can't even see the other side of the lake. And if you can see the other side, there are some like majestic mountains out there. And another one is Sesto, and the German name is Sexten. This is like on the Italian and Austrian border, and in Dolomiti Mountains, Dolomiti National Park. And these are like very monumental, very sharp edges of the mountains, and it's a good place for skiing, but also in the summer there's a lot of things to do there as well. Like I went there paragliding, and it was the most magical experience ever. And what else? Like I really enjoyed Carrara, also in northern Italy, Carrara, because you have sea on one side and a huge mountain on another, and there's like a marble mine on the side of a mountain, so you can see like the mountain being slowly eaten away by this marble mine, and the locals complain that somebody's stealing their mountain, but it still looks pretty nice. What else? If we speak about like things that can't be done in an RV, there's also Cape Town. Yeah, I wouldn't go from Poland to Cape Town in a car.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. So you get the sea and the Table Mountain that's like super flat and very tall, and and like if you travel from Cape Town along the coastline going east, you can just have like 1,000 kilometers of one majestic place after another.
Yeah.
And
that sounds amazing. So like you were just mentioning, it just hit me, like all these different landscapes are actually reflections of beauty, right? And making like a full comeback. Like when we start talking about beauty, you mentioned you had a question. I was like, I have to ask her this question, but then I forgot. So I'm bringing it back using your references of these beautiful places to ask you two questions. So first, what's the most beautiful place you ever been to? And second, what's the most beautiful object you own?
The most beautiful place I've ever been to, and I think I want to be objective here, because that's where my husband proposed to me, is Banff National Park in Canada. It's kind of like Alps, but less crowded. Like there's like very few people in Canada overall, and Banff is probably like the most crowded place in all of Canada. But still, there aren't very many people, and you can tell like I have something for mountains. Like actually, like my last name Górska means of the mountains. So like mountains are a recurring theme in my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, Banff National Park, it's so wild. We could see moose and deer and bear and like all these wild animals just like going on hikes. And the object, I think this would be my engagement ring, and I would show it to you, but I'm not sure where it is right now. But it's also like from Banff, And this is like the only place in the world where they have a certain kind of stone that's made out of fossilized ammonites. So this is like a shell of an ancient snail that's fossilized, and it has all the colors of the rainbow. And it only comes from there. So this is a very meaningful thing.
Yeah, that does look beautiful. So first of all, thank you for answering and moving on and approaching like the modern golden age. Like one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show was because I was already following you for a while, but then you entered in Interintellect as a producer, if I'm not mistaken, and because of that, you actually mentioned like this idea of me doing a salon with Cecile about like a modern golden age, and I was wondering, like, first of all, could you explain what you do in Interintellect and what are like your mission around it, and then we'll get into the golden age finally. So basically, the question is, what's your role in Interintellect?
Yeah, so I'm a producer, which means like I talk to hosts and people who don't even know they might be a host yet, and encourage them to host a salon. And the salon is like a video or in-person conversation on a topic you care a lot about. So, for example, like next week, I'm hosting a salon interview with Lenore Skenazy, who's an author of Free Range Kids. And she's a childhood freedom advocate. So like a lot of the topics we mentioned here in this conversation are going to happen there as well, like talking about like agency and cultivate and letting kids learn what they want to learn and building emotional resilience and stuff like that. But you can talk about like any topic that you like, and you don't need credentials in order to host a conversation about something. What you need is to be able to create space where everybody feels welcome and everybody feels safe to talk what's on their mind and behave polite and be kind to each other. So we've had like over 2,000 different conversations so far over the last few years, and they were on like all sorts of topics, but like what's common between them is this kindness and being able to navigate like potentially heated topics with grace and compassion and humor and yeah, some of these were like life-changing experiences. I've been to a bunch of those, and some of these are like very intellectual, some of these are very emotional, some of them are really artsy, and yeah, we have like all sorts of people who come in order to learn something new, or in order to make friends, or in order to like figure out like who else is working on similar problems as they are and connect with them. Yeah, and you're doing a very good job at it, because you were the one that made me realize that hosting a salon wasn't like this big monster that I thought it was, and so thank you for that. So, getting into the modern golden age, just to give you a little bit of context. So I started this podcast because I saw that Visa meme where he has all these dominoes, and it says like, if we tackle them all, we'll get to the golden age of humanity. And I was like, oh my God, I am moved by this. I want to be part of this somehow. I have no idea how, because my ideas aren't ideas that are good enough to move people towards the golden age. So what can I do? And I realized that I'm a very curious person. I really enjoyed conversations, and I consider myself a rather good listener. So I was like, oh, I can talk with people about this topic and try to understand like what are some of the next steps in order to get there. But after realizing that, I spent like 3 months trying to come up with this perfect vision of what a modern golden age is. And I said to myself, well, I cannot start a podcast on a modern golden age if I don't have like a clear definition. Like I'm supposed to be the expert on the topic, right? And so after 3 months of not doing anything, basically, I realized this makes no sense, because who am I to individually say what a modern golden age looks like, right? And so because of that, what I've been trying to do is to talk with a lot of people that I find have a vision for the world that somehow meets with this idea of a modern golden age, and just trying to ask the same question to a lot of people, and then understanding like what are some of the common threads and what are some of the patterns. And so
once I did that, I started to have these conversations. And that being said, I was wondering if you could share with us, like, when you hear the term modern golden age, like, what does it come to mind? Like, what's your personal definition of it? Without any pressure, because as I said, like, I've had like a lot of different answers, and there's no such thing as a specific right answer. But I was wondering if you could give us, like, what's your take on it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so recently I read a book about Leonardo da Vinci and how he grew up in this golden age ecosystem of Renaissance Florence and then Milan. And multiple times through the whole book, there was this notion of having many smart people from different arts working together. So it wouldn't be just painters or just sculptors or just philosophers or just writers, each of them working on their own stuff. Like, they would all like come together, and some of them were at the Medici court and some of them were at the Borgia court then in Milan. And that's how new ideas happen. You put people from like all walks of life and all sorts of interests and all sorts of specialties. And if this all these different sorts of people come together and try to exchange their ideas, like, something interesting will surely happen, because you're out of your silos. And like, currently when you think about like this education system, and especially like the higher education and academics, like everything is like very, very specialized. And some people will refuse to talk about something like that's very slightly out of their area of expertise because they fear they might be wrong. But yeah, a golden age means all these intersections of all these different ideas coming together in order to figure out like what's a good life. And I'm not sure if I'm making sense here.
Yeah, but, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is one thing about this like Leonardo Renaissance Golden Age thing. But when we map this onto the present day, like, we have this magical force called the internet, and I'm still amazed by like how many people are not taking advantage of it. Like, out of all my high school or college friends, like, I'm the only one who's active on Twitter. And I don't know why. Like, where is everyone else? And why aren't they participating in all of this? But yeah, you have this opportunity to connect with people who like live on completely different other side of the globe and are asking themselves the same questions. And us having this conversation is also a part of it. But at the same time, like, you know how easy it is to get pulled into like all this political or religious or semi-religious drama. So we have these tools at our disposal, and we can use them to connect with things we want or with things we hate. And it all comes back to this Visa's idea of like focusing on what you want to see more of. But yeah, like, in order for people to focus on what they want to see more of, like, they will need to think about like what is it actually that they want to do and want to see and want to like see manifested in the world. And you know, like, our current schooling system doesn't really encourage people to ask themselves these questions. And I know, like, I'm repeating myself probably, because like every thread or idea in my head like comes back to this, like, our schools don't teach people agency. And as long as like you're waiting in a corner and waiting for an adult to come and make things right, this golden age isn't going to happen. Like,
So first of all, did you finish? Sorry, I interrupted you.
I don't know if I finished or not. So yeah, like, I want to. So, for example, like, sometimes when there is like a challenging situation, I have this tendency to like hide under the blanket and wait for it to go away. And I feel like a lot of the modern problems are caused by like people doing exactly this, like hiding under the blanket and either waiting for the problem to go away by itself, or waiting for someone else to come and make things right. And I'm as guilty of it as anyone else, and like, I keep doing this all the time. But in the end, like nobody's coming to save us. Like if there's hope for the world, it's like in every single person realizing, okay, like I am the one who's supposed to come and make things right. And of course, like you can't hold the whole weight of the whole world on your shoulders on your own. But as with cooking an egg, you learn one simple thing, and you realize you are capable of doing something, and this builds up to your confidence, and then you can try the next thing and figure out like where your boundaries are and how far you can go and where to ask for help and how far you can go together with other people. But yeah, like, in order to start, you need to realize that, yeah, this is you who is supposed to do all these things. And I'm still learning this all the time. I'm still unlearning this like sense that, yeah, here is your curriculum. This is what you're supposed to do. And don't read any other book under the table because you're not supposed to. and yeah, that's why I'm come back to this education thing all the time, because everything else flows from there. And now that I'm hosting the salon on free-range kids, like I begin to ask myself, like, okay, how can you raise a free-range kid if you're not an adult, free-range adult yourself? Yeah, like if you're still doing something because somebody's telling you to, and out of a sense of obligation that might not even be real, and out of the sense that, yeah, I need to do this and do that because everybody else is doing that. Yeah, I'm probably not as coherent here as I would like to be, but
no, but there were a lot of things, as you said, that can be unpacked. So first of all, like the idea of, I talked about this with Andrew in the previous podcast, where we talk about like connecting different people in the same space, like that like creating scenes when you connect a bunch of genius on the same scene and projects emerge. So that makes a lot of sense. And also like your insight on like the reason why, so Visa in his meme actually has like golden age of humanity, and only recently I looked back at my own like notes and I realized that the modern was something that I put there because I originally thought that was Visa, but like as I was thinking about it, I realized that it makes total sense, because for the first time in the world, in human history, basically, you can have a golden age that's not bounded by a geographical constraint, right? As you mentioned, like the Vinci and the Borgias and the Medici, all of them were in Italy, in Florence, in Milan, in a specific place. The same thing happens with Islamic golden age. So all of these golden ages used to be strictly bounded to spaces, and the internet allows for that to happen online and then leak out into the real world. So that makes a lot of sense as well. And like my next question would be, what kind of practices do you think we should aim at in order to get to a modern golden age? But you kind of solve that or answer that by pointing out this idea of increasing individual agency, which is something, by the way, that almost all the guests mentioned, like this idea of understanding that the only way for us to get into a modern golden age as the collective is to first get into like the golden age version of ourselves, right? And focus on how can we improve that craft, and finally tying all that with education makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure when this episode will come out, but like yesterday, I was seeing this question by this Twitter account called Rebel Educator, and she actually was asking what is something about the traditional educational system that just makes you like feel angry, and I responded with the lack of ambition, because education is like the best tool that we can have, and the traditional educational system has access to most of the future minds, and yet we aim at mediocrity, right? And so if we want to get to a golden age, we need to have like a fundamental change in education, either on the traditional system or by creating a lot of alternative systems that allow for kids to develop ambition, agency, the ability to think for themselves, critical thinking, like even metacognition, and think about their own thoughts and question their own beliefs. So I think that what you just mentioned was like this fully complete answer to not only what a modern golden age is, but like how can we get there. I would like to end though with one last question, which is, when you think about the modern golden age, what kind of values do you associate with it?
So, yeah, that's a huge question. And I feel like just connecting people and connecting ideas and giving them opportunities is not enough. Like, there are very agenting people who aren't necessarily doing good in the world, So, when I try to orient myself, I ask myself questions like, what kind of a world I want my daughter to grow up in, and her children and their children, and I don't know, like what kind of a world I want my grand 1,000 times grandchildren, what kind of things I want them to experience. And the thing is, like, with this whole technological revolution, it's really easy to forget about like the material, physical world, and it's kind of the thing that I mentioned, like we're out of convenience, we're getting rid of beautiful objects because they're like too difficult to make, too difficult to maintain, too upsetting when something breaks, and then you realize like you can't raise a child on a computer alone. Well, you can try to, but it won't be probably a wise choice. So it's cool to have online communities, and I love having online communities, but in the end, like, I'm not going to raise my daughter online. I need to like find like-minded people right where I live so that she can play with their children together and they have some nice places to go to. So it all starts on the ground up, and I wish I had better answers to this, but I'm still searching. Like, I'm still searching for a local community and a local group of people that would be aligned with what I value. And the closest I got to this was like this shamanic communities aligned around like plant medicine ceremonies, but that's still like happening like every once in a few months. It's not like people you meet every day. So as I mentioned before, there's this balance between like individuality and the sense of collective. So when thinking about values, like I know like my personal values are around beauty and love, and you know, it's a bit challenging to talk about it, but yeah I feel like there will be very many different communities focused around like different values. Like some of them might value like the sense of adventure and heroic quests, and some of them might value more like this safety and coziness and feeling at home and peace and love, and it's all good as long as there's this broader perspective and not just like focusing on your private individual self. And I feel like thinking about like all the generations who will come after, so like not just your own kids, but like 1,000 generations before and 1,000 generations after, is a good way to like broaden your perspective, like and to honor like the legacy you get from your ancestors. Like I know it's very popular these days to be upset at your ancestors or like ashamed of them, and I kind of get it because like I was there too, and you know, then I think about like my grandmothers who like lost children and had to live through war, and they lived through horrors that I can't really imagine. And like, who am I to judge their choices, and who am I to judge like how they raised their kids if they had to live through things like this? So yeah, it's like very useful for me to have this perspective that like it's not just about me, it's not about my children, it's about this like whole stream of life that starts like many thousands of years ago and will continue for many thousands of years after us.
Yeah, that was a very beautiful answer. Maria, once again, thank you so much for being on the show. The last question is, if people want to connect with you, if people want to find you, where they can do it?
Yeah, they can connect with me on Twitter. Like, I'm most active there, and I'm made_in_cosmos, or you can go to madeincosmos.net, where I occasionally write something. Hopefully, I will become more active again soon.
Perfect. Maria, once again, thank you so much. It was delightful to have you here. If everyone listening, please go follow Maria. We'll add the links for our social media on the description of this podcast. And maybe, if you like, please leave a rating at your favorite podcast platform. I'll see you all on the next episode. Bye-bye. Maria, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joao. It was a pleasure.